Alright guys, welcome back for another video. Today we're going to be showing you how to make a wiring adapter for a Link Monsoon into a Mazda Miata. So this is going to be specifically for 96 and 97. This connector is going to be used across most of them. You can get this off Ballinger Motorsport, but they don't have a plug and play for these 2 years, so you have to either repin a other plug and play unit or just use a wiring unit, which is what we're going to show you today. So I'll show you what comes in the box. We're going to be using a Link Monsoon. So this one has plenty of I/O for a 4-cylinder. This is going to be your almost most basic. There's an add-on below this, but that has a lot less I/O and not a built-in map sensor. So this has a built-in 7-bar map sensor. So you have that. You only need the single connector. So this is the pin kit A. And then potting compound, this is going to be to kind of seal all these pins together once we situate it. And then if you want to add anything like Deutsch connectors for like additional I/O that's not connected to the stock harness, you can do that. But we'll pretty much show you the way of getting all the wires attached here, the pin outs, and just soldering everything up, sealing it with both heat shrink on the pins and the potting compound, and then pinning it into the Link. Okay, so as for pinouts, if you have another place that makes an ECU for this, it makes it very easy. You can just reference their pinout and then copy it over to your new ECU's pinout. So this will work for any ECU. Worst case, you have something that's not done, you just use a wiring diagram, but this makes it easy. So now we just can denote which connector numbers each of these are. So from left to right, this is 4. And then it goes 3, 2 is an optional, which they just have on all of their ECUs, so we're not going to do that. And then number 1 is all the way to the right. So now we can just go through the list. We can mark this and then see all these other pins that say like NC. We can theoretically just chop those pins off so they're not in use, and then we can just solder on all existing wires and then go back over to look at what the pin out is from there. So that way we're not just going back and forth one pin at a time and making it very time consuming. So as far as how we're going to be wiring this, I'm just going to bend all the pins straight like this. It's very easy. You can just do it with your hands and just kind of hold it at the bend. It's kind of hard to film and do this at once. And then we're just going to clip it at the bend length. And that way we can just kind of not worry about all these weird angles, and then this is just much easier to solder and heat shrink. Alright, so this is how our connector ends up. We don't have too many pins left just for this setup, but you can see I just kind of trimmed the ones that we're not using at the base, and then I kind of cut the pin length in half, and that's what we're just going to solder to. So for that, we'll have our flux here. We need to flux and tin all these wires. And then when we take our wire leads, we can just hold on the heat and then put it to the tinned wires, and it should just stay on there. And then we're going to heat shrink each pin from there. Okay, so here's the adapter. I pre-tinned the wires a little bit. The flux I use isn't the greatest, but you'll just kind of get some solder on there beforehand, and you'll take your wires. You need to strip the ends. And then, let's see if I can hold this enough to get this on camera. And you'll just heat her up. You can hold it on just the pin directly. And then you'll you can pre-tin the wire as well, which will help. You can just kind of get some flux and your solder. Kind of hard to do everything on camera at once. But you can just tin the wire like that, and then when you reheat everything to put it on the pin, you just kind of melt it together, and there you have it. It's a little offset on the side of the pin, but that won't matter. We're going to put small pieces of heat shrink on there and just kind of help reinforce that, and then the potting compound is also going to help with that. So we're just going to basically do this. There's about 30 something pins, so we don't want it too repetitive, but just kind of get you the idea of how to start making the adapter for your application. Okay, now with everything soldered on, you can see just kind of do it like I was showing you before. And then we can throw all of our heat shrink onto the bases and heat shrink that. So that's kind of what you're going to end up with at the first point. You can use whatever wire color you want. Obviously, if you have a pinouts direct on hand, you can do all the same. But if it's something you want to know you're going to be servicing in the future, you can use the proper matching colors. But as for this is mainly just to go into another stock harness setup. So he's not going to be adding too much extra. And then your lengths, you could pick whatever. Once we heat shrink this, we're going to bunch all of our lengths to the center and then trim to each, as the centers are going to be longer than the ends that have to come inwards. Okay, so once you get all your heat shrink on, it's going to start looking a lot better. We got our heat gun here, and we're just going to heat shrink this all together. So we'll just do one side at a time. It might get the other side, so you just want to make sure that none of your heat shrink have lifted up off the bottom at all. So we had one here that was slightly raised, but you just want to make sure, just in case the heat goes by it, that no other pins are going to be touching. And likely they're not going to be, but you might have like a smidge that you might be worried about. So I have this one piece of heat shrink here that's a little weird. It's a smidge of solder sticking out, so I'm just going to melt that back just a smidge, and then I'm going to heat shrink. Alright, try to get a little view here, because people want like a satisfying heat shrink portion. You don't gotta go crazy with it. You'll see it start shrinking, obviously. And then once the one side looks good, flip it around. Just try to keep the gravity forcing these down, just in case they move and start doing everything. And there you have it. So there is half completed adapter, and you can choose to wire in the end first, or you can pot the bottom, but because the bottom has to dry, I'm gonna terminate the end with the Link connector. So we'll take our A connector out, and it's gonna come with the connector and the pins. So these are Super Seal 1.0s. They're pretty easy to crimp. It's like a standard U-shaped crimp. And then when it's unlocked, you'll have these these squares open here. To unlock it, you'll push it in from the bottom, and then when you're done pushing these pins in, all they do is push in the back. If you need to depin them, you just pull pretty hard. So it's pretty easy to depin these, and then when all it's pinned together, you'll push these down, which I'll show you again later. Alright, so I just trimmed back all the wires to the same length, but what we're gonna do here is we're gonna find all of our common grounds and just link them together. So like connector 4 here has 1, 2 grounds on this side and another right here. So we're just gonna link these all into one pin, just because the Link isn't gonna use as many ground pins. So if you look here, you have a ground in the bottom right here, another ground in the bottom right, and this green ground out, that's gonna be your specific sensor ground. Same with this shield / ground. So you wanna typically keep those for your sensors and like your crank and cam sensors. And then those were like, if you have here on this 3 open, where it says sensor ground. So pretty simple from there. You don't wanna mix those up, or you're gonna have something called a ground loop. So we're gonna just find the other ones. I know we don't need this heater sensor ground. We have 3L here. This is another ground, and there's one here on the 1O. So we're gonna just have 2 pairs of grounds, and then the other one will be our sensor ground. So I'm just gonna find those on this, and we're gonna splice them in lower. That way it doesn't get all bulky at the end, or trying to splice multiple wires onto a single pin. All right, now to make our inline splice, we trim back 2 of these, and then halfway down this wire. That way it's easier to put on heat shrink. And then we have our open barrel splices that we had showed you in another wiring video. So basically we're gonna put these together like so. We're gonna take our crimp tool here, and we're gonna find the correct die that's gonna fit the best, which you can work down in stages just to make it easier. And what this is gonna do is cold weld the wire together just from the shear force, because something like this you don't really want to solder, because with the vibrations and possible heat, those can come loose easier. But as for like circuitry, you're not gonna be able to do crimps like this. So now you can see very strong seal, and then you could just come over the end with your heat shrink again, and then it will fit right over all of them at once for a nice clean splice. Get your heat gun going again, and once it warms up, you have a nice heat shrink. This is how the OEMs do it from the factory, and you're typically not going to have any issues with this, especially once it's all terminated. And this isn't something that's going to be constantly tugged on like in the engine bay, because you're going to be behind the seat. So I'm going to do that for our other grounds, and we're going to start making our pin connections at the end. Okay, so all of our pins are terminated, so now we're going to get into the wiring part. So we're just going to match everything. So this top one I already did right here is our, it's going to say 14 volt, 12 volt, same thing. This bottom right one is ground. Then I have our secondary ground here, so that's going to go in right above that. And again, these just kind of push in, and you'll just kind of feel it out. And you can also see from like the front, probably not on video, but you can see if it's seated all the way, and right now this one is not. So sometimes like the wires like to try to kink right at the base when you start getting it in, and it could be if you have a little weird crimp or like the metal slightly higher, so you can give it like another just little squish. And then we're gonna put this in there, see if it goes in this time. Yeah, and you can feel that, and you feel like a kind of detent. So now we're just gonna go down the line, referencing our pinout, and then just matching everything here. And when you put something in, so say like the AC relay here, that's going to be an auxiliary output. So you'll find it here, and then you can write it next to which one you do it. So whether aux 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You want to just keep a list of everything, because for Link you're going to have to assign everything to your engine and configure everything. So if you mix that up, it's just going to be a pain to find later. Okay, so we'll start with our fan pin. So our auxiliaries is going to be this third row, and then counting from this side, everything is always from the wire side. So this is aux 4, 3, 2, and 1. We'll just put our fan on auxiliary 1. It doesn't really matter. The only thing that will change is if you're doing like drive-by-wire or high side drives, which on this one it's going to be, I believe, 5 and 6. That can do high drive, otherwise they're going to be a ground switch. And then when we go down to our next one, so 1C or 1E, this is going to be a check engine light. So this is also usually going to be an auxiliary output. So just in case we have to drive it high side, we can put this one in 5. And again, we might have to just barely crimp this just for the base, where it just wants to grab the sheathing. Sometimes it sticks out depending on the crimpers that you use. These are Sargent crimpers, so they should be fine, but sometimes the pin twists and doesn't want to go right in. So I'll get this fixed and put that in there, and then we'll work our way down the line. All right, so we got that in, and then we're just going to go to our next wire, which should be 1G, right next to that pin. And this is going to be our AC relay. So that we know is going to be a ground. So we can just go right next to this. And just make sure to start writing it down. Come in here and write AC relay. Granted, my handwriting's not good. And then we'll get to our next, which is our AC switch in. So this is going to be called a digital input. So it's going to be off switching. Read here, frequency input, switch input, or VVT position. So not the actuator if you are using VVT. So DI1 is going to be our 5th pin here at the bottom. So we'll count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5. And we felt the detent. Come back over here and do A, C, N. So pretty simple. I'll just go through the whole thing on video for the people that do want to see it. Next is our vehicle speed. So it's going to be the next DI next to that. Hopefully you guys can see everything because I kind of have this propped up weird. There you feel the detent. And we already have our other ground hooked up. I did put some other leads on here. We're gonna just put a CAN sub harness on here just in case the customer does want to expand the car later. So then we get down to our last pin on connector 1 on the top side. This is 1U. And this is going to be our fuel pump relay. So another auxiliary output. So that's a ground switch. It doesn't seem like, yeah, so this one's seating all at the end, but it doesn't really want to, there you go, seat too well. So you just got to do tug tests on everything to make sure it does seat. Otherwise you're not going to be able to get your lock in there. Fuel pump. And then we'll just go to our connector 3. So the first one we're using here is our front O2 sensor. So this is going to be going to the stock O2 wiring, which people typically are going to wire their wideband input to. And this is going to be an analog input. So on here, you start your analogs. Right here is the first one, if you want to just use them in order. So far right on the second row. You'll take that, just pin in. Feel the detent. Doing it down the line like this might make your wiring a little bit cleaner, but it all just depends how it goes. So our coolant temp sensor is this one. This is going to be a temp wire on the input because this needs a pull-up resistor. So the temp inputs have that pre-enabled on here. So temp 1 is going to be our 3rd pin over from that AN volt. And then we're going to use our 2nd temp pin for our IAT. Alright, I ended up just putting a new pin on it just for ease. Our next wire is referenced as voltage reference. So this is going to be our 5 volt out. So you'll just find it on here. And that's going to be our 3rd on the bottom row. So this is what's going to supply all your sensors, like your TPS, and if you have like fuel pressure, oil pressure, and any analog type voltage signal. Get this in there. I believe this one's, yep, this one's seated. Yeah, you just have to play with it. The wires are so small, once they're supported in the connector and you're pushing, sometimes you'll bend the wire a little towards it. So that's also what's making it a little harder. So our next pin, laptop went off a little bit, is our IAT. So we're gonna go right next to our other temp input on our 2nd row and go to IAT. And you can use voltage inputs for these if you do wire in an external pull-up resistor, but you need to verify which size you need to wire in per the sensor. And then our next one is our O2 sensor heater ground. So we didn't even need this one. And then our last pin on the 3 connector is our sensor ground. So that's what I showed you earlier with the ground out pins and the shield ground. So for this one, we're just going to use the shield ground since it's the only labeled one for sensor ground. Even though Miatas do have ground loops from the factory, there is another wire that can be considered sensor ground. But you do, that's for like voltage feedback, so you get a good clean trigger signal. So this one we can actually just end up trimming. Granted, we wasted 1 pin. It just saves us from doing that. That's still heat shrink down there. That's not going to affect anything because it is just a ground wire. Then we'll get into our 4 connector. So this first 2 pins already terminated into the ground we showed you. And then our next one is going to skip 1 and then go to our cam signal. So cam is always going to be our trigger 2, and that's going to be this far right one. Because that's secondary, even though it's reading off a CAS and it's on the cam, there's still both cam and crank signal. And then it's going to skip 1 again and go to our condenser fan. So that's like your AC fan. So you can do another auxiliary output for that, and you can configure these to both work at the same time while it's running, just so you have a little extra cooling. And then our last auxiliary output here is going to be our IAC, and then we're going to pin that into auxiliary 6. Just the pain of these pins sometimes. These do work for both like Haltech, Pro EFI, Link. These pins are using quite a bit of ECUs, as they are somewhat easy to work with most of the time. And then our last 2 on the top here is going to be our cylinder 1 injector and cylinder 3. So these are wired in sequential on this car. So cylinder 1, we're just going to go and find injector 1 on here. So it's going to be these top 4. 1 is the 4th one, and then you work your way outwards. So we'll have 1 and 3. And then the spark on this is still a wasted spark. So we're only going to use 2 of the spark outputs on this car. And then if you went to something like a sequential with like coil on plug, is where you could use the other 2 outputs, but that's not going to be pinned into this factory harness. So you can always add it to this connector later and not need it here. All right, so now we're getting to our bottom side of the connector. So this whole right side is what we're going to be looking at, and we'll start at our AC relay. So we're out of auxiliary outputs. So another thing we can do is use injector or spark outputs that we're not using. So we'll come down to our ignitions, and we're only going to use ignition 1 and 2. So we have 3 and 4 available. So we'll just use 4 just for the sake of this. And then work our way towards the inside with any other ones that can come up. Okay, our GoPro died, so I just got her charged up a little bit. Our next wire is going to be our clutch switch. So we're going to go to another digital import. So we'll have, we used DI1 and DI2 already. So now we can go up to DI3, which is going to be the 3rd row here. Once you start getting this all populated, it's going to start to crowd up. and then that's going to be the third one over from the right side on this third row. So same as before, gets pretty repetitive to a point, but I do want to try to make a note of what each input or output each will do, because some people just don't understand it. And really, wiring is not that hard. You just need to know what goes where. You're just connecting the dots. So next on the bottom here is going to be our TPS. And then this is going to be another AN volt pin, so we can find where our AN volt 2 is. And we look here, we already used AN volt 1, temp 2, temp 1, AN volt 4 is here, and then AN volt 2 is next to all of our auxiliaries. And next to the DI3 that we just pinned in for our clutch switch. We'll just kind of get that in there. Yeah, you could start and go row by row, but then you're gonna have to just find each pin for that. I'm just going down the line this direction. So there's plenty of different methods that work for each, but it's just whatever works best for you. So that's gonna be it for our third connector, and then it's just gonna be the last one here. So we've already have power and our ground, so it should just be the rest of these bottom ones. So if we go down to there, our next one for F, so we'll just verify here. So third one over, right here. And then this is going to be our crank signal, so that we're gonna pin this into trigger 1. Right at the top here, and the second over. And that's good. So then our next one is going to be our tach output. So we can use another ignition for this one. Or we would be able to, if we need to high side drive it, we can always go back to our 5th output and unpin our CEL and do our tach. That way there's no pull up needed for there. So if we come back down here, and that's going to be our second one here. And you can just pull these out. So this is a good example of how to do this if you do run into this. And then repin that into number 3 for our ignition. And we'll take our tach and put it into 5 for our auxiliary output. And there you go. Yeah, so another thing, just noticed, you have AC relay on 2 pins here. So theoretically, this one that we put on our ignition 4, we don't even need, and we can cut that out just like that extra pin that we did earlier. So this is no longer needed in the system. So then we have 4 final wires, and we'll drop back down. So this is going to be our cylinder 1 and 4 ignition. And then that's going to be down to our ignition 1. So 4th pin over on the second row. And it just catches again like a few others, but simple fix, and we just kind of round that out. And this one's going to be our cylinder 2 and 3 ignition, so that's going to go right next to this one. See if this one hangs up as well, which it does, because when we're crimping it, I don't know if you can see, kind of offset it sometimes, so you just kind of gotta get it bent straight and find out where the pin wants to sit, as sometimes the little last latch doesn't grab on too well. Okay. Okay, we have 2 more wires to go. So this is gonna be our cylinder 2 injector. So at the top, we have 1 space, and that will go in here. All right, the battery died again, so I just kind of finished up what I was doing, these top injector pins, and then I kind of zip tied the whole harness together, and then I added these CAN wires just for any expansion. So now we tape this up, and now we have our potting compound, and I forgot to get the little squeezer for it. So I'm just gonna try to push everything manually, but it just mixes as it's in there. And then you'll just kind of fill this up, and that's what's kind of gonna insulate and help give some more strain relief to the wires. So just make sure it's sealed up pretty good with the tape, and then you can just fill up the whole cavity. And I believe this takes around 15 minutes to initially set. And yeah, pretty much it. Wait for it to dry, and then you come back and you have a completed harness. All right, so this is how you're just kind of gonna fill it with that compound. I had a small little drip through there, so I just needed an extra piece of tape on the bottom. So that's what I was saying, you don't want it to leak out. It kind of self-levels for the most part, but it's not too warm in here. So you just gotta kind of put it where you need, and then just add all your extra stuff in there, and it should help kind of get in there. So I'll show you this. I'll wait for it to dry and here's the final product. But yeah, it's pretty much complete and simple sub harness to make. So we had a slight mishap overnight. Our epoxy leaked out of our tape dam. So now we're currently setting up a hot glue dam, and we're just gonna do the whole edge of it. Just kind of, because these little indents, like they stick out here, so it didn't like sit all the way flush against it. So we're just gonna make kind of like a cardboard thing, and then just use some plastic bonder to kind of encapsulate the whole thing. And that should seal this time and actually cure it, because this didn't even really cure all the way because of the weather out here. And it's probably like 30 degrees. So we'll get that all set up and just kind of show you how to build more cardboard around this. All right, so here you kind of have all your glue dam made. So you just want to make sure the whole perimeter is sealed well, and then you're just gonna fill up the whole area with your epoxy or resin, whatever you want to call it. And yeah, I just gotta mix this up, pour it in there, and should be good. So here's it filled up with 2 of those containers worth. It's a little messy to get in there, but I was just trying to cover the whole like body of it, just because the potting compound kind of wouldn't cure, so the whole thing was a little sticky. So I just wanted to make sure everything's covered and supported. So you kind of cover all the wires, and then that'll kind of give it more strain relief towards the base where the pins are at. All right, so here's how we finished it off. Cardboard ended up sticking on the wall, so we were able to wire brush most of that, and then just to where I was trying to fish in like the mixing stick to get it all along the edge, it didn't really seep all the way down just because of the cold weather. But everything's going to work fine, and now everything's nice and supported well. And we just wrapped it up with some loom tape, and here you have it. So here's the Link Monsoon G4X for the 96-97 Miata. And this can work for anything. You don't even need an adapter like this. You can wire this connector directly to your stock harness, and it'll also work fine. So yeah, thanks for watching the video. If you guys have anything else that you want to watch, drop a comment and we can try to make something, or make like an informative video of how to make something as well. And yeah, thanks for watching, and see you on the next one.